Today we're back on the Darling River at Menindee this time for the launching of the very first paddle steamer ever to be built there. Now the craft is not quite on the same scale as the old paddle steamers of the past. This one is more a steam-powered raft and was built by the students at Menindee Central School under the direction of science teacher Gordon Dewey. The project has reached into most subject areas in the school and has involved many community members as well. The raft not only heightens interest in science and industrial arts, but it also plays an important part in stimulating interest in the study of local history and culture. The story of the raft's construction is to be told in a book called P.S. Menindee, a book which will be written by the students themselves in the Western Readers series. The Western Readers editor, Peter Dargan, flew in specially for the launching. He's followed the building of the craft right from the very beginning. Now, this program is really about the raft and its construction. Gordon Dewey will tell us something about that in a moment. But first we should consider the early paddle wheelers themselves. Paddle steamers played an important part in the history of both the Murray and the Darling rivers and were used to move barges upstream laden with stores, building materials, mail, in fact practically all of the needs of the early pioneers. And they returned to Lake Alexandrina with wool and wheat for shipment to the world. Now, it wasn't always easy. In the drought, for instance, boats might be caught upstream for months, stranded in the mud. During floods, they often left the river, occasionally to be stranded as the waters receded. Today along the rivers there are many reminders of those early days. This rather grand old vessel carries tourists from sightseeing trips along the Murray. The paddle steamer Ruby, one of the most famous of the old Murray-Darling steamers, is now preserved high and dry in a reserve in Wentworth at the junction of the two rivers. On the Darling, the paddle steamers often went as far as Burke and Brewarrina, and Menindee was one of the ports of call on the way. These days, Menindee is renowned for its lake system of water storage and for the fact that water from here is pumped overland by pipe to Broken Hill, 100 kilometres away. Menindee can also boast that Burke and Will stayed here at Maiden's Hotel, in fact, on the fatal attempt to cross Australia from south to north in 1860. Another explorer, Charles Sturt, used Menindee as a depot for his expedition in the 1840s. But let's now return to our own tale about the steam-powered raft. We asked science teacher Gordon Dewey how it all started.
We started in 1978, and it all started with a local member of the community donating a steam engine which was in poor repair, but we did restore it. Then we saw the possibility of putting the steam engine to use, and in doing that we decided we might build this raft to go on the local Menindee waterway. The raft comprises 3 or 4 main sections. It has a superstructure on which everything is mounted. At the rear we have rudders for steering, the stern wheel at the back, and the most important part is the steam boiler which generates steam to operate the engine. On the boiler there are a number of fittings to run the boiler at optimum pressure. There's a pressure gauge at the top which indicates pressure in kilopascals. There is a sight glass on the side which indicates the water level inside the boiler. There's a safety valve which is a bronze fitting on the top which relieves pressure if it becomes too great. The steam is fed to the engine through lag tubing and enters the engine together with oil which lubricates the cylinder, and the engine then oscillates. The power is then taken via belt or chain to the rear stern wheel. The bearings on the engine must be lubricated, and this is done regularly with an oil can. The rudders that steer the raft are controlled by a simple Archimedes lever principle which is studied by students in the class. As well as that, the timber rudders were constructed in the technics room using dovetailing techniques and have come up to give a quite pleasing appearance. Students are quite enthusiastic in polishing all the brass metals. A lot of the children do know a lot about the operation of the machine. That is getting steam up, initially lighting the fire, which takes about half an hour to reach a head of steam.
Why do you need to preheat the engine?
So the steam won't turn back to water.
Now, once you've got a head of steam, what happens?
Well, it comes into here and then it pushes and pushes and pushes, and it drives the engine around.
Aaron, would you send the whistle?
And again.
We asked school principal Dave Gilbert about the different subject areas covered by the project.
Up until now, it's largely been in two subject areas, that is the science area and the interest elective area. But we intend to use this as the focus point for a lot of language across the curriculum. We can talk about it, we can draw, we can paint, we can make, we can do lots of things from this focal point. The kids, I think, can see the potential just as we can. The nearer we get to the launching, the more possibilities arise. We can think of a paddle steamer trip down the river. The social science areas of reenacting the transport of wool, and some of the shopping paddle wheel steamers were good enough, just taking services to the people along the river.
The idea of this game is to throw the dice. We've got two teams, and you have to face the difficulties that paddle steamers had in the olden days. See, in this one here, it says stand back ahead, and if you land on this spot when you throw the dice, you have to go back 3 spaces because that was a hazard that paddle steamers had in the olden days. Other ones are ones that make you go forward. For one here, the captain's birthday. If it's the captain's birthday on the paddle steamer, they probably have a big party, and you have to advance 3 spaces. Will you start the game, please, and throw the first dice?
The raft was constructed in the backyard of the school, and in 1978 we had a test float of the superstructure, and then it was returned to the school for completion. On the day of the launching, we had a local crane and truck in once again to remove the raft from the school to a suitable loading site at the river. Of course, a project like this wouldn't be able to reach anywhere near this stage without help from the community, like the initial donation of the steam engine, materials to build the raft with, supplying of expert skills in machining, advice. They have provided facilities in crane work, in transporting, which has made the raft very low in cost for the worthwhile project that it is. So we've also had terrific support from McPherson's Metals in Sydney, who have supplied steam fittings and steam piping. R.S. Haynes and Associates, they are consulting engineers in boiler work. They've done a tremendous amount of paperwork and given technical advice. The North Mine in Broken Hill, they did a great lot of work on the boiler. Specifically Alan Smith, the chief engineer at the North Mine Broken Hill, and his boilermakers Ron Marnie and Tom McGuckin have put in great efforts.
Bill Moroney was one community member who would not have missed the launching for anything. We asked him about his part in getting the boiler working.
I came involved in this when the original boiler wasn't suitable, and through the North Mine, who I've had a lot of dealings with, they got in touch with me and explained where I could obtain this boiler for the project. That I contacted the ice and produce people, got hold of it and took it to the North Mine, and from time to time liaised with Gordon and the North Mine to make sure that everything went according to what Gordon wanted.
Well, it's up and away, and to begin with we thought it was down under as well, but with quite a few students removed off the raft, all was afloat. The raft had to be moored for the period to raise steam, which is about 3/4 of an hour. Whilst the boiler is preparing for steam, there are other jobs, for example oiling the engine, fitting the belt, tensioning the belt, checking for leaks and any other problems that might arise.
Fill the boiler to about 1.5 inches in the sight glass.
Cutting wood along the riverbank was always a problem for the old steamers, and proved no exception for this trip either, with some of the local community people managing to lift the axe to cut some timber. The boiler is initially filled with a siphon hose and tank full of water to give the required level as seen in the sight glass on the side of the boiler. After the boiler is initially fed by hand, an injector on the side of the boiler automatically pumps water in when required. Steam is a wonderful thing with colours and the decorative finish of a lot of the metals used on the boiler, like gunmetal and brass, copper. Makes an amazing sight on the river.